The future is not something that happens to you, but something already decided for you. Whitney Webb has been tracking a blueprint for the future that is already being built around you, and the plans are far worse than you thought.
There's going to be the top tier of people who develop and maintain AI and set and determine what its objective functions are, and then sort of a second class who, which we would assume is larger than the first class, so they don't explicitly say that.
Donald Trump is back in office. Half the country is elated, while the other half is getting more terrified by the day. But Whitney Webb is not focused on either reaction. Far from it. Her focus is on something most people are not asking. Who is actually in the room with Trump?
In my book about Trump's mentor, Roy Cohn.
Why does Webb point Cohn out?
And he very much essentially taught Trump the art of the deal, as it were. And, a lot of his Cohn's close associates, like the Pope family, for example, were very politically connected, also connected to organized crime, arguably.
But according to her, that's the norm.
But we're very much in the business of making backroom deals, and that's how, power, political power in the United States functions. And so, fundamentally, I think a lot of what Trump likes to focus on and promote about his political style is around negotiations.
That's technically the foundation. Backroom deals in place of ideologies and policies.
Of big tech executives and a lot of talk about making the U.S. the AI and crypto capital of the world, and how much of that is necessarily going to translate or trickle down to sort of refer to, Reaganite economic terms.
To be clear, Webb is not calling Trump evil. She is pointing at something more subtle, yet dangerous. It's a system where the metric for success is how big the announcement looks, not who it actually helps.
And I think it is very likely that over the next 4 years, there certainly will be some Americans that economically benefit, from Trump's economic policy, but I don't necessarily think that's going to be.
So who are the people in that room really building for? Webb has spent years following that thread, and it leads somewhere that should make everyone deeply uncomfortable, because the men advising Trump on AI and the future are not just businessmen. They've already written what the future looks like.
A lot of what Trump likes to focus on and promote about his political style is around negotiations, whether those are diplomatic negotiations or negotiations with businessmen that lead to big number investments he can tout.
Webb brings former Google CEO Eric Schmidt into the picture. He is also the architect of U.S. military AI policy and also co-wrote a book with Henry Kissinger. And what's inside it is not speculation, but a roadmap.
That book posited that essentially AI is going to make a two-tiered society. There's going to be the top tier of people who develop and maintain AI and set and determine what its objective functions are, and then sort of a second class who, which we would assume is larger than the first class, so they don't explicitly say that.
And it gets even worse.
And so they essentially argue that by not making those decisions and outsourcing that to AI, this particular class will lose the ability to make those decisions over time.
They refer to it as cognitive diminishment. You won't just lose power, you will lose the ability to realize that you have lost it. Now remember the men in Trump's orbit, because one of them is no stranger.
We're likely to see that develop, and it's not really surprising that you have Larry Ellison of Oracle involved. He's recently had comments about the need for things like digital ID in the United States, which would be sort of a core foundational aspect of this type of wide-reaching.
Now, Ellison said something that Webb flagged immediately.
But invasive AI surveillance systems on citizens will help them be on their best behavior, which is a rather Orwellian.
It goes without saying, that's not a warning. It's a design goal.
Oh, I certainly don't think that's positive. I think it's sort of the technocratic model that we discussed earlier, where you sort of have an elite class that sort of set, the system that will micromanage the masses.
So let us now narrow down even further. Who built the political conditions that made all these possible? That answer requires going back much further than most people are willing to look. There is an open loop in this case most people never close. If powerful elites are really coordinating across governments and corporations, where does the actual decision-making happen? Webb comes in with a very specific answer.
And, oftentimes Congress people aren't really directly writing the policies they're voting on. They're handed laws. And a lot of sometimes those are developed from these think tanks, which are funded largely by, multinational corporations, and sometimes, directly by big tech oligarchs like.
But an even bigger shocker is that the structure enabling all these was openly described in congressional testimony over half a century ago.
Multinational corporations, many of them based in the West, making joint ventures with the communist-owned, state-owned enterprises in the East, Russia and China, and that these were essentially fusing to form an economic structure that was unaccountable to any government in the world.
That structure never collapsed. It just evolved. And today, Webb points to something the mainstream press almost entirely ignored.
But someone like Howard Lutnick, for example, who was head of the transition team for Trump and is his incoming Secretary of Commerce, has the same, his company he runs has the same tie, arguably a more direct tie, to a Chinese government majority-owned.
Because here comes the irony.
A financial entity that was a big scandal for conservatives when Hunter Biden's Rosemont Seneca was also tied to it. But there's been no conservative uproar over this tie.
Why the silence? Webb connects it to a buried scandal, Chinagate. In this scandal, the Commerce Department was specifically targeted. Officials who knew too much died in the same plane crash.
Why can't we examine this? And shouldn't it be disturbing that the incoming head of the Commerce Department has a direct tie to the Chinese government in the context of that type of scandal of Chinagate?
At this moment, the same machine seems to be wearing a face of financial liberation. Most people in the crypto space believe stablecoins are the antidote to government financial control. Webb thinks they might be the most sophisticated version of it ever built. And she has a historical parallel that reframes everything.
Yeah, so BCCI was basically this bank that was set up as publicly as a development bank. It was about essentially banking the unbanked in the global South.
But there was more to the bank.
But in reality, that bank had been set up by the CIA, and it was involved in all sorts of things, including laundering profits for arms trafficking, drug trafficking.
Now, one of the purposes of the bank was to bank the unbanked. Does that ring a bell?
That one of the co-founders of Tether and some of the other people involved in early Tether appear to have significant intelligence ties. Some of them, like Brock Pierce, have ties to pedophilia scandals that happened in the early 2000s.
But wait, there's more.
There's a lot of people that promote Tether have very rose-tinted glasses about it and parrot this idea of banking the unbanked and sort of ignore the FBI Secret Service connection, the fact that they've seized people's money when the U.S. Treasury Department has asked them to do that, even if they're not U.S. citizens.
Trump said no CBDCs, but here's what Webb points out that almost nobody is talking about. Yet Tether checks all the boxes of being surveilled, programmable, and seizable.
And those were the same concerns that a lot of Americans have had about central bank digital currencies.
That label might be different, but the destination is the same. For people celebrating Bitcoin's rise, Webb has a direct message for them, because the ideology that made Bitcoin compelling is quietly being buried under the weight of institutional adoption.
To globalize the dollar and covertly dollarize a country without formally dollarizing it in the way that places like Ecuador and El Salvador were formally dollarized.
The pattern is now clear. Financial control, cognitive control, and surveillance infrastructure are all converging. And next, Webb tells you exactly what the next 4 years look like. But she goes deeper than that. She also reveals a deep secret, the one mechanism holding all of it together. By now, you may have noticed that everything Webb has described does not require force to implement. Instead, it requires fear, followed by a solution.
Would be a little different. The utility of manufacturing consent via fear is that when people are afraid, they tend to not think critically and they tend to act impulsively and emotionally. They tend to look for easy solutions. And so if you have you've created fear in the public and then you offer a tailor-made solution, you can more easily get consent.
That's the payoff. That's how every layer Webb has described actually gets installed. Not through coercion, but consent that was engineered from the start. That was ideally the end goal. And the tools for the next phase are already in place.
People have probably noticed Palantir stock performance. I think it's very likely that over the next 4 years, Palantir will become an even more important government contractor, considering that a lot of people that are prominent Palantir investors or co-founders have attached themselves in various ways, either to the Trump campaign as donors or occupying important posts in the administration.
She also paints another possible scenario.
That there's going to be an increase in biometric digital ID. Trump has sort of marketed this as a way to stop mass migration. The dialectics are different, but it's sort of a policy that's being marketed all over the world.
The environments might be different, and the fear strategies might be different as well, but the policy is the same throughout. And for the Make America Healthy Again movement, voters who backed Trump, specifically hoping to challenge the medical establishment, Webb delivers a cold reality check.
Where deregulation at the FDA, for example, could result in a flooding of the market with mRNA products, which are very controversial with a significant segment of Trump's base, for example.
So what does Webb actually want to do with all of this?
Her own decisions. If people can be shown that there is sort of a fear element here and a coercive and manipulative element to it, I'm sure the decisions
It's about being informed.
Different decisions, and that consent would not necessarily be there if they were aware of the manufactured nature of that situation.
That's technically it. That's the entire argument. An informed public is the only variable the blueprint did not fully account for. And they're doing everything within their power to ensure as many people as possible remain just that, uninformed. So, are you among those willing to be informed and see through the sinister motives outlined in this blueprint?